Welcome to the CMMC Proof Podcast. I'm your host, Darius Phillips, a certified CMMC assessor and provisional instructor. The format for today's podcast is going to be a little bit different. This week, I participated in a joint webinar hosted by CIRAS. I joined Jim Hoflen from CISA. He's a regional cybersecurity advisor for the state of Iowa. The webinar was hosted by Melissa Burant, who is a supply chain program manager for CIRAS. And essentially, we focused on sharing the free resources that are available for any organization that falls into the category of critical infrastructure. That includes defense contractors, universities, even small businesses. And Jim, he gave an overview of all the free resources that CISA offers. And it's a lot of them. It's a long list of cybersecurity resources that are no cost to you. All you have to do is ask for them. Also, I covered the recent updates for the CMMC proposed rule, sharing some of the feedback from DoD, who recently released a overview video for the CMMC proposed rule. So this is certainly a webinar that you want to watch from beginning to end because we share a lot of resources with you and pertinent updates. And it's my estimate that if you take advantage of the no-cost cybersecurity resources available offered by CISA, including the training, that could easily save your organization tens of thousands of dollars. So with no further ado, let's get to the webinar.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today, we're going to talk about cybersecurity and the resources that are available to you as a business. Cybersecurity is a good business practice, but we're going to talk to you. We know how intimidating cybersecurity can be. So I've gathered a couple of resources who can hopefully guide you to some better solutions to secure your organization. Before we get started, I am going to talk to you a little bit about who I am, what organization I work for, and then I will turn it over to our two subject matter experts, Jim Hoflen of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure and Security Agency, otherwise known as CISA, and Darius Phillips, who is the CEO and founder of Aspire Cyber. My name is Melissa Burant. I work for Iowa State University's Center of Industrial Research and Service, otherwise known as CIRAS. And we are an organization, a small little unit under Iowa State University, and we do a lot of industry outreach. And so what that means to you is we work to support industry in a number of different ways to help them grow and prosper. So we have a number of different programs within CIRAS that we support. The program I work under is called the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, otherwise known as MEP. And this is a national program, and it is in place to help manufacturers in the United States. And so when I say help manufacturers, that can mean so many different things. In this case, we're going to talk about cybersecurity. So CIRAS works with partners across the country and across the state to try and bring resources to the businesses here in Iowa and help them solve problems that they're struggling with. So, the Center for Industrial Research and Service has been around. We celebrated 60 years last year. I am proud to have been part of CIRAS for 9.5 years. My background, my first real job, I was a federal employee, and I worked for the Department of the Army, and I was a federal contracting officer. So during my tenure with the Army, I was a civilian, and I managed contracts in Iraq and Afghanistan. So someday I'm going to write a memoir about that experience. But a lot of really great experience, and it kind of puts me in a unique position when we're talking about cybersecurity, because working with industry for the last few years, it's been really interesting how we have these cybersecurity issues, right? We know that there's bad actors out there who are trying to get into our systems and onto our online, all the ways that can permeate our life and our businesses. But I find that it's interesting how I think, daunting the task is to secure our environments, and how I like to say it's a different language, right? So when we're talking to manufacturers, manufacturers have their own language, right? They know all the things manufacturing. And when I speak GovCon, because that's what I grew up on, um, speaking GovCon to manufacturers or anyone else in industry might be overwhelming. And so what I'm here to share with you today is we do have resources to help you navigate some of these questions and problems that you're experiencing. So you're not alone. And I think you're going to learn a lot today. And I hope that it helps give you some things to work on and tools to be aware of that can help you secure your businesses. So CIRAS has been, like I said, been around for 60 years. One of the things we do is to measure our success in the programs that we administer across the state is we do what they call impact surveys. And so we survey industry to see what did the work that we did to support you. So we do individual projects with businesses where we do one-on-one work with them as well. And so over the past 5 years, CIRAS and our partners have helped more than 4,600 businesses in every county in Iowa, all 99 counties, generating an economic impact of more than 3.1 billion and creating and retaining over 38,000 jobs. So that means that the work we do, working with industry, partnering with industry, has a direct impact on industry success. And I can tell you it's one of the most rewarding jobs I've ever held. It's amazing to learn what we're doing here in Iowa, what the businesses are doing in Iowa, and try to help them bring solutions to them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Hoflen of CISA. Jim, if you want to share your screen, you're up.
Good morning. How does that, can you see my screens okay?
I think so. It looks good to me.
Awesome. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Hoflen, and I am a cybersecurity advisor for CISA. CISA is part of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. We are the newest federal agency, just coming up on 5 years old. My boss likes to say that we haven't learned to mismanage ourselves yet. I would disagree with that, I think, because I think we do a pretty good job sometimes of doing that ourselves. Our job is to provide a secure and resilient infrastructure for the American people. And we have goals and things like that. My goal is defend today, and then goal 2 is secure tomorrow. My background is I'm retired U.S. Air Force as an enlisted person, which if you're in the military, you know that means I worked for a living. I've been in cybersecurity for probably just coming right around 30 years right now. Most of that time, I have been an IT manager. So what that means is while cybersecurity has always been important, it's always been one of a stack of things that I have to take care of. You also have personnel, you have budgets, you have facilities management. I mean, there's a ton of stuff that goes into being an IT manager. And cybersecurity has always been there, but it's never been my real, it's never been a super high focus for me. After I got out of the military, I went to work for Lockheed Martin. I went to work for Northrop Grumman. And then I ended up saying, well, this is nice, but I wanted to try something different. So I went to work for NATO. So I've been in Germany the last 6 years, directly supporting the NATO efforts over there. So what we do is we have 16 critical infrastructures. These are defined by presidential directive, and these are what we're supposed to focus on. But here's the thing I found. They all work together. They're all interrelated. They all rely on each other. For example, you can't run a hospital without water. You can't run water without chemicals. You can't move chemicals without transportation. And you can't do any of it unless you have the actual equipment to do it. And that's where critical manufacturing comes in. So when I look at these, I go, okay, I don't care. My bottom line is, and the goal that I have personally and with all the other cybersecurity advisors across the country, is we help everybody. I don't care who you are. I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care what your organization does. A rising tide lifts all ships. So we work across everybody on this. When CISA started, one of the things that they did that actually made sense was they said, um, people don't want to talk just to DC and get downward directed. Oh, here, you should do this, you should do that. They want somebody that'll come out and sit down across the table from you and talk with you at your office, at your facility, that'll talk to you like a person, right? So to do that, they split the country up into 10 regions. We're in region 7, right in the center, because the country revolves around us, right? Um, and so we have cybersecurity advisors in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. We're here, we're local. I actually live in Elkhorn, Iowa, which is a very small town, but if you know it, it's between Des Moines and Council Bluffs, right along I-80. So I'm here to personally come and talk to you and help you however I can. I have a compatriot out in eastern Iowa by the name of Shad Roberts, who works generally the eastern side of Iowa. I generally work the western side, but we work together across wherever we need to go. We have a lot of different, I would say, expertise areas that we can help you with. First one's emergency communications. Now, these guys generally work with like the 911 systems, okay? They'll work with the emergency notification systems and so on. And they specialize in emergency communications of all types, including the PSAPs where your 911 calls go and so forth, just to make sure everything all works together. We also have chemical security inspectors. They say they're inspectors, but quite frankly, they do a lot of stuff that's non-regulatory, okay? So if you have chemicals in your facility that could be used for a nefarious purpose, they can help you learn how to store and handle them safely, okay? If you remember the Timothy McVeigh, when he blew up the building in Oklahoma, that was nitrogen-based fertilizer. A lot of companies, a lot of agricultural places in Iowa deal with anhydrous ammonia. This stuff could be used by bad actors for very bad things. And we don't want that to happen. So these guys will help you out with that. We also have protective security advisors. Now, these are people that will come to your facility and look at your physical security side. They'll look at your, for example, your doors, your cameras, if you have a fence up, and they'll just give you some options for consideration for improving your physical security side of it. But as we all know, physical security and cybersecurity are tied together very, very tightly. So we work very closely with the PSAs, or physical security advisors in Iowa. Chris Judge is the one who's pretty much covering Iowa, and we have a new person starting up as well. I have a list of contacts for all of these people that will be shared, and I think it's been shared already in the chat. And then we have me, cybersecurity state coordinator and cybersecurity advisors. I'm both. Our job is to help you. Now, when I say help you, I want to be very careful about a few things here. Number one, everything that we offer is completely voluntary. You don't have to take our advice. You don't have to listen to us. You can tell me to go pound sand and I'll go pound sand. Everything we offer is also no cost. You've already paid for it with your taxes, so it's completely free to your organization. The third thing is that everything that we offer is non-regulatory. So for example, if I come into your facility and we're talking about, what you've got in place and, what maybe some options for consideration, and OSHA calls me up and says, hey, I heard you went to this manufacturing plant. Did you see any of this? My response is going to be, what manufacturing plant? I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. I am exempt. Anything you tell me is exempt from freedom of information requests, and I am exempt from state disclosure laws. Nothing that we talk about can be used in any regulatory fashion at all. So I'm a safe person to talk to. Let's put it that way. All right. So we try to build these public and private sector relationships. We support preparation, response, remediation efforts. We do a lot of things that we can do to help you. But please, as I said, please understand that everything that I do is completely voluntary. All right. This is kind of an obligatory slide for all cybersecurity uh, briefings. It's the person in the hoodie. And the idea is, who is targeting you? Well, the bottom line is it really doesn't matter who's targeting you. The basic uh, the basic things that you put in place are going to be effective against any of them. But I, because of my military background, I like to know who the bad guys are. Who am I thinking of? So let's take a look at a few things. This is the FBI IC3 Internet Crime Report, and this is the data from 2022. The 2023 one has not been released yet. If you'll notice down the red lines down at the bottom, the losses have gone up to $10.3 billion. Now, this was in calendar year 2022, and it's going to be higher in 2023 when the numbers come out. The thing I find interesting is that business email compromise is running $2.7 billion in loss in 2022. This is the fake invoices that get sent to your company. This is equipment that you order being delivered to a wrong address and so forth. In comparison, ransomware came out at 33.3 million. So you look at the difference there between 34.3 million and 2.7 billion, you can see that just because something is in the news doesn't mean that's where the real problem is. Okay. For both of them, the biggest vector of attack was phishing emails. Okay. And followed very closely, I might add, by remote desktop protocol or people working from home that come into your system and try to go ahead and they run your HVAC system. They run various supplies and chemicals in order to in order to run the business. This is the state of Iowa. Okay, from the FBI report for fiscal year 2022 or calendar year 2022. You'll notice there were 116 or 161 business email compromises, and there was 27 ransomwares. Okay, so it's a good idea to see, okay, what are we looking at for issues? Here's one of my favorite slides. Who gets hit with ransomware? Because again, that's in the news and that's a big one. You'll notice that critical manufacturing down at the bottom, 157, second only to healthcare and public health. So it's a bigger problem than a lot of people seem to think. The government facilities one, which includes schools, is at 115. So a little more data to try to figure out who's trying to hit us. We kind of know how. We know it's business email compromise and espionage for primary. So who's hitting us? It's organized crime. Okay. They're the ones that are doing it. And why are they doing it? Financial gain. Okay. Second to that is espionage. Espionage includes intellectual property theft. Okay, so that's where it says espionage, which sounds all sexy and cool, but actually we're talking about people stealing your blueprints, people stealing your trade secrets, and so forth. So who's the bad guy? This guy. This is who you're dealing with. Okay. Now, manufacturing has been typically cyber underserved. And when I say underserved, I don't just mean that we haven't put a lot of stuff out there, but a lot of places haven't. And a lot of manufacturing organizations have not done a lot with cybersecurity. And there's some reasons for that. First one is that intellectual property threat typically starts with an insider threat. You have a disgruntled employee, you have somebody that swaps companies and so forth. And insider threats are very, very difficult to protect against because we all want to trust the people that work for us. We want to trust that everyone wants to do the right thing. And that's not always the case. And you feel like if you're going to protect really, really stringently against the insider threat, your people may start to feel like they don't protect you, you don't trust them. And that's never good for an organization. Another thing that's with manufacturing is that they have a lot of reliance on industrial control systems, or what we call operational technology. Okay. And operational technology is traditionally not addressed by cybersecurity personnel. And the reason is pretty simple. If you're a IT specialist, okay, or a hacker, you probably have to go in and maybe deal with 2 or 3 different operating systems. You have Windows, you have Linux, you might have Macintoshes you have to deal with. When you get into operational technology, there's over 50 different operating systems. There are it's a whole new world. So even if a person broke in, they were like, now what do I do with this? I don't understand how PLCs work. I don't understand how history servers work. I don't understand how CNC machines work. Okay. Unfortunately, unfortunately, this information as to what to do when you get in there is becoming much more widespread and much more available on the dark web. Another one is most manufacturing, virtually all manufacturing that I'm aware of, is a business to business arrangement. Okay. So there's no big public outcry if there's a cyber event. There's no call to action with the government throwing money at it. It's not like if you hit a school, for example, with ransomware, everybody gets freaked out because, oh my gosh, this is kids' information, or healthcare, this is patient information. When a manufacturing gets hit, it doesn't make the big news, okay? And then finally, ransomware can just be seen as a cost of doing business. One thing I've learned about manufacturing is that they know exactly, and I mean usually down to the penny, how much it's going to cost them if their production shuts down for a day or a week or 2 weeks. And because they know exactly how much it's costing them, let's say it costs the company $50,000, and the ransomware is 30,000. Well, do you take the risk? Do you just pay it? Do you hope for the best? I mean, these are not trusted suppliers, granted. Okay. But a lot of the times it's just a strict dollar value thing. You don't have as much, how would I put this? You don't have as much reputation loss to worry about as a financial organization does, for example. Our goal, CISA's goal, my goal is to change all this. Okay. And we have the tools and the resources to help make that happen. But I need your help on that because I can't do anything unless you ask me. So one of the phrases in there that was in one of the things was called critical manufacturing. This was specified in Presidential Directive and the NPPD. And what they say is if you're in primary metals, which basically means you process steel, aluminum, or machinery where you make engines, turbines, power transmission equipment, heavy, or electrical or transportation stuff, you're considered critical. I don't like that phrase because all manufacturing is critical from my perspective. Where I grew up in a very rural North Dakota, the plant that makes Bobcat skid steer loaders was close by. And it was absolutely critical to our economy, to keeping people in the area, because if you didn't take over the farm, you didn't have a lot of options. You went to the military like I did, or you went to work building Bobcats. So it is critical. And again, even though the presidential directive defines critical manufacturing, to me, everybody's critical. So I will help everybody. But I just wanted to put that up there. So where do we help and how do we help? Well, if you look at this slide, which is a little fuzzy, I apologize for that. I stole the graphic because plagiarism is a good thing sometimes. You'll notice that it's a rough timeline of an event of a cyber incident. Okay, you're going along, then you have an event. You drop down into response and recovery, and you come back up to back to where you were. We work what we call left of bang or left of event. We work in the prevention and the protection side. We want to help you not have that bad day. That's our goal. That's our biggest goal. Now, if you do have a bad day and it drops down into response, unfortunately, there's not a lot I can do right at that time for you. Okay, I cannot come in and fix your system. I wish I could, but I am legally prevented from touching your keyboard. I am not allowed to because if I did, or if I say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, if I do that, now the federal government is liable for everything, for all of it. And I am prohibited from taking those actions. This is where you're going to have to work with your managed service provider, with your cyber insurance company, and so on. Now, once you get back up to the equilibrium again, to where you're back up and running, you can call me again and say, hey, how did things work? I'm going to say, how did things work? How did your incident response plan work? How did your recovery go? Were there things that went really well? Were there things that maybe you could use a little help with? I've got some resources that can help you there. But primarily, I work in the prevention and the protection phases. How do I do that? I've got a lot of no cost cyber services that I can do. I can come and do assessments for you. Okay. And when I say assessments, I want to be clear on this. They're non-evidence based. It's you and me and your team sitting around a table and just talking, just having a conversation. I come to you, we set up a time, and we just talk about various things you have. How does your incident response plan work? How do you have remote access set up for your employees? How do you do your backups? Things like that. We just talk. We also do training and awareness. We have lots of exercises, playbooks. We have notifications that we can send you to say, hey, we see where, you know, this type of vulnerability is being exploited in the wild. And you should probably take a look at this and see if it's appropriate. And then we'll help you out. We do response assistance. Now in this, again, you have to remember CISA is federal. We run the .gov domain. We run all federal agencies' IT systems, okay, for risk management. So when I say incident coordination up there, what it's talking about is if you call me, I'll call the FBI. I will notify our chain. If your particular incident is considered to be of national significance, then we'll come in there and we can do some other things. Let's put it that way. But we do a lot of threat intelligence reporting and information sharing. We kind of look at it like a neighborhood watch thing. If other companies are getting hit, maybe a certain way by a certain organization using a certain threat vector, then you want to know about that so you can protect yourself. Conversely, if you get hit, other companies want to know about that too. Okay. Again, this is all non-regulatory and we won't share any information that you don't want us to share. So if you get a hold of me, and I certainly hope that you do, um, what does this look like? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up what's called a cyber protective visit. Sounds very impressive, but basically it's a phone call. I set up a Teams meeting. We sit down and we just talk. You tell me about your organization. You tell me about the things you're concerned about the most. And I tell you, okay, here are some of the things we can do. And we just kind of develop a relationship. All right. The step two part of it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to sign up for what I call cyber hygiene vulnerability scanning. This is a completely free service. And what we do is you send us a list of the devices that connect to the internet. anything that connects to the internet. You just send me their IP address. We go ahead and look at that IP address. We scan it. We don't break in. It's non-credentialed scan, and we just look for vulnerabilities. The advantage to you as an organization is we give you the exact same view of your organization that a bad actor would have if they were checking you out, if they were scoping you out for a possible attack. So you see what the bad guy sees. Okay. It's completely free. It runs once a week, and you get a report once a week. And it runs it's every week until you tell us to stop. The third thing I'm going to suggest is that we sit down and we do what's called a CPG, or cybersecurity performance goals. I know it says cyber. My apologies. Um, and what this is just a very basic assessment. This is where I come in and sit down with you and your team for 2 hours or 2 or 3 hours. And we sit down and we have a list of 38 practices that everybody, doesn't matter what you do, if you're a hospital, if you're a school, if you're a county government, if you're manufacturing, if you're an ISP, doesn't matter. These are very generic, very high level. Here's 38 things that you probably want to consider doing because we know that they are very, very effective. Okay. So we'll ask you to go ahead and schedule a time where I can come to your organization. Again, I show up at your organization. You don't go anywhere. We could even do it over a Teams meeting if you like, but I prefer to kind of come and talk. The value of it is the conversations it generates around the table. Okay. We also offer a lot of training. Okay. Um, we offer independent study courses, there's videos, there's virtual training, webinars like this one, on-site presentations. One of the biggest things we do is tabletop exercises. We will come and do a tabletop exercise with you. Okay. There are a ton of resources out there that you can download your own tabletop exercise if you want and run it yourself. If we have over 50 canned tabletop exercises that all you got to do is go through and take out the parts you don't like and then just run it internally. If you don't want to run internally, I'd be glad to come and facilitate. If it's a large one, say several organizations get together and do it at once, then we have a team out of Kansas City that will come up and run the tabletop for you. They're very good. They're a lot better than I am, but we get the job done however we can do it. To get into these tabletops, workshops, and presentations, here's some of the things that we offer. Now, please note that a lot of these are physical security, bomb threats, um, insider threat stuff, de-escalation, school security, countering unmanned vehicles, workplace security, cyber incident response. There's a ton of things, okay? We have a lot of resources, and again, they're all voluntary, they're all cost-free, and they're all non-regulatory. So having said all of that, here's my key takeaways that I hope you think of, okay? We're no cost. Your taxes have paid for them. Everything that I offer you is completely no cost. We're voluntary. You don't have to do anything. I can't say, hey, you need to do this. I will never say that. I will say, here are some options that you may want to look at. Okay. And if you ever feel uncomfortable or feel like, this isn't for me, we'll leave. Okay. We're non-regulatory. It says the PCII program. What the PCII program actually says is it's protected critical infrastructure information. What this means is the results of any assessments we do, any conversations we have, we cannot tell anybody else. As I said before, we're exempt from FOIA, we're exempt from state disclosure laws. I can't talk to a regulator about anything that we talk about. Please understand, though, that this protection on that information is only while it's in our hands. What you do with it is up to you. The protection does not follow the information. For example, in the military, there's top secret documents. Well, that document is top secret. Doesn't matter where it's at or who has it, it's still top secret. That is not the case with this information. This only is information, only protects it while it's in our hands. What you do with it is up to you. We do assessments. Like I said, we have this very beginning assessment, this very high level one. That's 38 questions that I'm going to basically ask that you sit down with me and we go through. But we also have ones that are specific for, let's say you want to just, you understand the high level stuff, but you want to dig in deep into your payroll system. Okay, for example, we have deep dive assessments to a particular service. We have assessments that cover specifically how you deal with your vendors, what's your supply chain look like? How do you manage your supply chain? We also have assessments that go very, very deep into governance and management. We have a range of those that we can do. The tabletop exercises, talked about those quite a bit. You can run them yourself, download them off our website for free, run them yourself, or you can have me come and facilitate, not a problem. Or we can get somebody out of Kansas City if we have to. If it's a statewide one, we have a team in DC that will come out that are very, very good. Workshops are, I can come and run a workshop on how to develop an incident response plan to help prepare you for that bad day that I hope never comes, right? We have workshops on a lot of different things. And finally, alerts and tools. We can let you know when, other organizations are having an issue. One of the things I really want to emphasize here as part of this is what's a law called CIRCIA. Now, CIRCIA was a law passed in 2022, but the administrative rules have not been implemented yet or finalized. What CIRCIA means is one part, there's several parts to it, but one part is if we find out through looking at the dark web or wherever that you have had a data breach, whether you know about it or not, or it looks like from some organizations or some nefarious traffic somewhere that we find out that you might be hit with something, we have a duty to let you know that, okay? Or if you have a vulnerability that is being other places are getting hit with, and we know you have that vulnerability through our scanning, we let you know. I pick up the phone and I call you and I say, hey, this is Jim from CISA. We need to talk. Again, can't tell you to do anything, but I need to let you know. The other part of it is at some point, covered entities, and that we don't know what that means yet, but covered entities will have to report significant cyber events within 72 hours to the federal government. Now, we don't know what that all is going to look like, but I'm just letting you know, coming down the road, this is something that we're going to have to look at. But the best thing in here is the alerts. Like I said, it's like a neighborhood watch. All right. Please understand. Here's all of our points of contact, by the way. Okay. Please understand that we're here to help. We want you to not be the low-hanging fruit. We do not want you to be the unlocked car in the parking lot at 2 o'clock in the morning. If we can make things difficult, if we can help you make things hard for an attacker to get to you or to do damage to you or get into your system, then the attacker is going to move on. Okay. We don't want you to be that unlocked car. We want you to be the locked car with the alarm bells. All right. That's basically all I'm here for. My entire job is to help you. I have no other job. I have no other priorities. This is what I do for a living, is help organizations. Please get a hold of me. This particular slide is available in the chat. Please get a hold of us. We're here to help you, but we can't do anything unless you ask. Let us help you. And that is the end of my spiel. Thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. Hey, can I ask you a quick question?
Absolutely.
So towards the end there, you talked about covered entities and the
Yes,
responsibility report, and you said that covered entities hasn't been defined yet. Is
correct.
there, I didn't see it on your slide. Is there some kind of a reference or a regulation that addresses that covered entities that we could look at it more closely offline?
Unfortunately, because the administrative rule, it's public law. It's a federal
It-
law. It's called CIRCIA, CIA. Um, the
Okay.
rules have not been finalized, so I don't have a good information for you. You can look at the law, but as far as the implementation of it and what a covered entity is, what a significant cyber event is, how organizations are going to have to report it, none of that's finalized yet. And I don't have any other insight other than I know it's coming. I can just see it in the distance.
Okay,
All
so
right.
for those of you on the on the webinar, what that sounds like to me is it's very similar to what where you've got the DoD requirement, right? And some things haven't been finalized yet. There's a published rule, or they're in the rulemaking process, but they're still working out at whatever levels, or perhaps it's by organization. It can really depend on the regulation. They're trying to determine what that means operationally.
Yep, absolutely correct. Until it is actually defined, I really don't
Mhm.
know what to say on it, to be honest.
But it's good, it's good to hear that, because I've never heard of that personally.
Okay.
So it's good to have that awareness, and now I will go research and see what I can learn from it. Obviously, regulatory process rulemaking is it is not fast.
It
but
works at the speed of government.
but and this is what I am, my plug to all of you here on this webinar is you have an opportunity with this rulemaking. It is posted for public comment usually. And a lot of people aren't aware of this. The government doesn't just make rules and say this is how it shall be. There are, in this case anyway, there are situations where they post potential rules and then they ask for public feedback. What I've found in the years of working on this side of things is people don't know that that exists unless you're really in the know. And where we see it a lot is in government contracting. So something for you to be aware of. I will do some homework after the event to see what I can find out about CIRCIA, and share that with you guys. And if you guys have questions, please, we want this to be interactive. We're going to hear from Derek Phillips next. One of the reasons I wanted to have this webinar today is what I'm hoping to achieve here is for not only for you guys to see that there are resources available to you, but to kind of highlight also some of the differences in what those resources might look like, right? So Jim represents a government entity who has some free resources out there that can help you secure your organization. And there are in the past year, I've noticed a lot of other government agencies who are also offering similar, the NSA just came out with one, with some. And working with clients through some of these, free resources, it's what I found the difficulty is companies aren't really sure, well, what should I do? And if this is what my customer is asking for, does this meet the needs of my customer? And so, I want to make sure that you guys, again, this is a different language, right? Cybersecurity is a different language, just like manufacturing is a different language. We all are ignorant in what we don't know, and that's not stupid, it's ignorant, right? I'm ignorant about all things, I don't know, whatever. We all have our areas where we don't know all the things. And so that's why we're here, to try and bring these to you and give you an opportunity and let you know that there are people we can connect with to help you navigate through these difficult, some of these that seem really insurmountable. So with that, I will let Darich. It looks like you've got your screen share up, Darich. I will turn it over to you.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Melissa, and certainly thanks, Jim, for that awesome presentation. Can y'all hear me? Good. All right. So I hope, like myself, hope many of you, as Jim was outlining the free resources offered by CISA, that you were calculating just how much money it could save you. Because as a consultant, I was crunching the numbers, and my estimate is easily on the low end $50,000, on the high end well over six figures. That all of those no-cost services that CISA offers could save you a lot of money. And in the context of CMMC, like Melissa mentioned, we really wanted to do this presentation to kind of outline, okay, what's available out there for you that's no cost, and then where those no cost services leave off, what can consultants like Aspire Cyber pick up and help get you across the finish line? Because it is important to set those proper expectations, knowing that CISA and no other federal organizations, agencies offer a all-in-one solution, a CMMC in a box solution that will completely help you satisfy the requirements. However, what they do offer are a lot of the pieces that could help supplement your efforts and could help reduce the investment that you need to make to satisfy those CMMC requirements.
Darich,
Yes.
will you explain to the group, just in case, what CMMC is?
Yeah, we're definitely do a deep dive into CMMC, but just high level right now. So it is the cybersecurity requirements for DoD contractors and subcontractors. So there's a clause in most contracts and even teaming agreements, if you're a sub, the DFAR 7012 clause, which requires that if you have controlled unclassified information or even federal contract information, which I'm going to go into more detail in this presentation, that you have a certain set of cybersecurity requirements that are contractually that you must comply with in order to be in compliance with your contract. And right now, the CMMC is a proposed rule. It's in rulemaking, and the DoD is on schedule of rolling out the implementation for that rule and start showing up in solicitations in FY 2025. So there's three levels. We're going to go into more detail, but it's once you get to level 2 and 3, there are a lot of requirements. On average, it's taking defense contractors 12 to 18 months to implement those requirements. This is not something that you can just do overnight, cram and do in 1 week. It takes a lot of implementation, refining your processes. There's a lot of documentation requirements. So we're going to talk more about that during my presentation. So a little bit about myself. So I am a certified CMMC assessor, provisional instructor, and also the founder of Aspire Cyber. Our company is a candidate C3PL, which means that we are in the process of becoming one of those authorized companies that can perform the CMMC assessments. And in order to do that, we have to be assessed ourselves against those same NIST 800-171 requirements. So we have to experience firsthand what you all are going to have to experience. For those of you who are going to need a CMMC level 2 assessment, Aspire site has to go through it first. We'll be assessed by the Department of Defense, their DIPCAC assessors, and we have to score a perfect 110 points. So it's no small feat, but know that whenever you're consulting with a C3PO or certified CMMC assessor, that they know the requirements inside out, and especially with C3POs, they have to have gone through it themselves before and demonstrate that they understand all of the nuances before they can assess you. And so I've been in cybersecurity a little over 22 years now. Got started in the Army, enlisted, just like Jim. I worked for a living, but I only did 4 years in the Army. After getting out of the Army, I worked as a defense contractor for Lockheed Martin. Spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. Once I got tired of playing around in the sand, I returned to the private sector, worked for Hewlett Packard Enterprise as an information security officer. And prior to my wife and I starting Aspire Cyber, I worked for Bank of America doing third-party risk assessments. In that role, I performed over 100 third-party risk assessments. And for financial services, they have a really mature model for how they assess their supply chain. Definitely the DoD and the federal government can take some notes from the financial services industry, but they have really similar tiers where they have a self-assessment, they have a virtual assessment, and then for their high critical vendors, they have where you have to come on site and be assessed. And what gave me the idea to start Aspire Cyber is because whenever I was assessing small companies, I would see that a lot of them did not have in-house cybersecurity. They didn't have that cybersecurity expertise on staff, and they were really struggling with completing those cybersecurity requirements that were required by Bank of America. And a lot of them were making it a lot more complicated than it had to be. So it was my idea that, hey, we could cybersecurity compliance does not have to be complicated. We can make it easy, and that's what Aspire Cyber is on a mission to do, just that. All right, so I'm just jumping right into with CMMC. Again, this is a program that assesses the existing DFAR 7012 requirements. So these requirements have been in contracts since December 2017, and CMMC is just a program to validate that defense contractors are actually in compliance with their contractual requirements. It's not implementing new requirements, it's just independently assessing the existing requirements. So it's really important to understand that. So in the proposed rule that was released, it was published in the Federal Register December 26th. And for us compliance geeks like myself, it was made public the Friday before Christmas. So early Christmas gift for DoD. It was like 240 pages of just the CMMC program regulations. I enjoyed reading every page and taking notes. But this was the first time in the 2 years during the rulemaking process that the DoD had published the rule. And it is a proposed rule, has to go through public comments, which it's in that phase now. I'll give you some more details about that later. But one of the biggest questions that I'm asked all the time by defense contractors is, how much is CMMC going to cost me? And one of the good things about the proposed rule is they did give some estimates to DoD. So here, and before I get into the actual cost, is really important. So basically, the DoD, they emphasize over and over and over in the proposed rule that any estimated cost for complying with CMMC does not include costs related to that DFAR 7012 clause and related to implementing NIST 800-171. So the actual implementing the technical and administrative controls, DoD's position is defense contractors and subcontractors who are processing, storing, and transmitting FCI and CUI, they should already be in compliance with 800-171. They should have already charged the government based on their solicitation, their bid, and factor that into their costs for the implementation. And that is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of defense contractors, especially small contractors, subcontractors, where it costs a lot of money to implement 800-171 and to be able to demonstrate it to an independent C3PO assessor. But that's DoD sticking with that position, like, hey, you should have already been doing it, and this is what this clause right here talks about. So it's not related. And then as far as essentially the DoD doubles down on it, saying that, all right, it's a business decision for anyone that's doing business with the DoD. Hey, if you are not willing to make the investment to comply with 800-171, that DFAR 7012 clause, then that's just a business decision you have to make if you're going to have the DoD as a customer. And I've certainly heard from a lot of defense contractors where they are making that business decision to determine that it's not worth all of the investment it's going to take to meet those contractual requirements. But do understand, this is a contractual requirement that has been in place since December 2017 as far as required. So even if you're a subcontractor, likely that clause is in your teaming agreement. And even if the clause is not in your teaming agreement, it should be. But if you're storing, processing, or transmitting controlled unclassified information, federal contract information, then like Jim mentioned about like top secret information, the requirements follows wherever that information flows. So wherever it's flowing, those requirements follow. But yeah, really important to understand that. Now, actually getting to some numbers. These are some of the cost estimates that the DoD has outlined based on the levels. So a level 1 CMMC assessment is going to be a self-assessment. So you do get the self-attest, and someone from senior leadership would have to report your assessment results annually, and essentially saying that yes, we are complying with the 15 basic cybersecurity requirements outlined in FAR 21 for level 1. And DoD is estimating that to adequately perform that self-assessment annually, looking at just under $6,000 costs related to performing that assessment. So for level 1, you don't need to hire a consultant to come in and do that self-assessment. You could potentially even work with CISA to not necessarily do the assessment for you, but just leverage any cybersecurity assessment that CISA has performed for you, leverage that for level 1 to help with your self-assessment. Now, for CMMC level 2, that's where you have the full 110 requirements that are outlined in NIST 800-171, and the DoD for certain programs, and it's going to be a small percentage. I believe they estimate less than 1% of contracts will permit a self-assessment for level 2. And even if you're doing this level 2 self-assessment without hiring that external CMMC third-party assessment organization to come in and perform that certification assessment, you're still looking at $43,000. And that's, again, this is an estimate from DoD. I know a lot of consultants within the CMMC ecosystem think that this is on the low end, but this is the estimates that they provided. And it's the first time really DoD for the CMMC 2.0 rule where they provided estimates. Level 2 is where it gets expensive. If you have to do that certification assessment, see, you're easily looking over $100,000 to have that certification assessment performed. And that doesn't factor in all of the costs related to the 800-171 implementing those administrative and technical controls. Because it get really expensive really quickly. And going back to DoD's position, it's a business decision. If that's too much overhead for your contract, then as a business, you may have to make that decision that, hey, this is just too much hassle for us to continue providing services to the DoD. But easily over $100,000 for your certification assessment and all of the related costs. That's every 3 years. Now, once CMMC does become a final rule and it sends solicitations, the defense contractor or subcontractor will need to have that's level 2 certification prior to award of that contract. So you can bid on the solicitation, but you cannot be awarded that contract until your certification is on file with the DoD, and that SPURS score is reported. So it's for a level 2 certification. And then the last one is some related costs for C3PO. Again, these are the authorized companies that can perform the certification assessments for level 2. So, and what Melissa and I are working on is really doing a mapping to kind of identify all of the free services offered by CISA, NSA, Project Spectrum, and other organizations, the Apex Accelerators, the MEPs, and try to map that to some of the CMMC level 2 requirements so you can see what you can potentially leverage from those federal agencies at no cost versus what's going to be remaining that you will have to pay to implement. Now, when it comes, as I mentioned, level 1, I wouldn't recommend that you need to have a consultant to do that. It's pretty low level, 15 requirements. You don't have to be a cybersecurity expert to do a satisfactory self-assessment at level 1. However, level 2, 110 requirements and 320 assessment objectives. And I'm going to talk more about that later, but it is a heavy lift. It is not something that I would recommend anyone who doesn't have that cybersecurity expertise, and even more so if someone that doesn't really specialize in CMMC, because there are so many nuances, so many just unwritten rules that if you're trying to do it yourself, and then you're going to likely miss something. And these assessments are high stake assessments. You can imagine your contract award is pending on you getting that certification. So that's not something you really want to chance at level 2 or 3. I'll pause for a moment. Any questions about some of these estimated costs from DoD?
I have a comment, Derek.
Okay.
So to Derek's point about selecting a vendor. So, you know, when you're working through this and trying, depending on who your customer is, right? So one of the reasons why I've asked Derek to talk about CMMC and the NIST SP 800-171 is that since 2017, I've been following the DoD cybersecurity regulatory implementation. Like, what does it look like for businesses? And, you know, CIRAS has done webinars where we've had just basic secure your data, do the work. It's good business for you to secure your organization physically and, you know, virtually. Where I've seen the most engagement from companies is where it relates to that DoD requirement, because when it comes down to it, a lot of you are already in that DoD supply chain, or you wish to be, right? And so DoD has a big hammer they're using to say, listen, your supply, not only do you, Lockheed Martin, have to be in compliance, but you have to ensure your suppliers are also compliant, because back to what Jim said, you know, they're targeting critical infrastructure there, and it's coming through things like HVAC vendors who have access to your, you know, your organization through maybe invoicing, whatever that might look like. But I really want to highlight that it's really important. You know, Derek talked about, you know, there's different cyber vendors out there. I think it's really important, just like if you go to the doctor for an eye problem, you probably don't want to go to a foot doctor, right? Because they're a doctor, but do they really understand the nuances of how the eye functions to be able to get you to your best result? Along the same line, when you're looking for a cybersecurity provider, somebody who can help take you, you know, we've got the resources that CISA provides, and I think that's awesome that Derek did some of the math for you guys to see this is how it could really positively impact your business. But if you're going to need help to get through some of those nuances, right? Because Jim can only take you so far. You're going to need someone to get you across that finish line. It's really important that you pick the right provider. You're going to want somebody who not only understands what DoD is looking for, but understands some of the implications. And so that's one thing when you're working to find a vendor or somebody that, you know, you want to work with. I would always say, you know, if your customer, your end customer, or the customer that you're trying to make happy is looking at that DoD, you know, requirement, I would ask them, are you familiar with the NIST standard? Because there's other standards out there in the cybersecurity realm. There's no doubt about it. Like, you don't have to be NIST certified or not, you know, compliant to the NIST standard. But if you're trying to ask your question, what's my customer and what are they looking for, and who, you know, and make sure that whoever you're working with is tracking that, because there's so many little nuances. The requirement to be compliant exists. That is not negotiable. It's already in your contracts or your vendors' contracts, as Derek mentioned before. But to verify that you're actually doing what you have said you would do when you signed on the dotted line and said, yes, I'll be a vendor to you, but I didn't read my contract and I didn't understand what that meant for me. That's not the story we want to tell. So I wanted just to insert in there, make sure you're screening your vendors and asking them. And I have a little resource sheet I put together where, you know, again, working with companies over the last, since 2017, 7 years, with cybersecurity, a list of questions working with cybersecurity experts like Derek and Jim in the field, what would you ask? What should companies ask their vendors, potential vendors? And so happy to share that with you guys as well.
If I could jump in for just a second on that, I want to make something very clear about our assessments. We are not an accrediting authority, okay? So like, as Derek so kindly said, we can help you a lot, okay? We can help you do a lot of things, but our assessments, you cannot take our assessments to another organization, whether it's the DoD or whoever, and say, see, we did this, all right? And use that as proof that you did it, all right? Because we're not accrediting, we're not an auditor, we're not an inspector. We're assistants. We help you. Okay, we're advisors. So yes, Derek is absolutely correct. We can help you get there, but not in a direct form. So if you do one of our assessments, that you can't hold that up and say, CISA has certified that I do all these things. Ours are, like I say, we're not an accrediting organization. We're not an auditor. CISA can help you a lot of ways at no cost, just like Derek said, but our assessments are not audits. Okay, I just wanted to throw that in there to make sure that there was no confusion, because I don't want someone to come to say, hey, CISA came out, they did an assessment with us, it looks really good, we're happy, see here, we can prove it. It doesn't work that way from us. In order to get these certifications, whether it's the CMMC or any of the other ones that are required, depending on your industry, you have to go to an auditor, okay? And we don't do audits. I just wanted to make that a clear point.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Really important to set those proper expectations, because there's a lot of confusion out there, and hopefully we're helping to clarify some of this for you. As Melissa pointed out, as far as your vendors that you're using to help you satisfy the requirement. So let's say you're using a managed service provider, type of IT that's managing your IT. Now, in the CMMC proposed rule, the DoD is requiring that those managed service providers and managed security service providers also have a CMMC level 2 certification. So that complicates it a lot more as far as who you can use, those authorized services that you can use to help you satisfy the CMMC requirements. So it's a lot to take in. And then if you look at the estimated 200 hours for the C3PO to perform just the assessment, and typically the assessments, once they get to the assessment phase, it typically lasts between 3 to 5 days, and depending on if they need to come on site if you have physical CUI at your location. But there's a lot that goes into it, and that's just the assessment portion. So imagine how many hours goes into actually preparing for this assessment. That's the big lift. Right. So this morning, these are some screenshots, so kind of a little dim, dark, and maybe a little blurry. But this morning, 4:30, my 4-year-old daughter decided to wake up extra early. So I had opportunity to get up earlier than normal start as far as scouring the internet for any breaking CMMC news. And to my delight, I discovered that the DoD today published a video where Stacy Bosjanek, who is the DoD CIO for the CMMC program, and her team gave an overview of the CMMC proposed rule. And these are just some of the slides and the key takeaways that I gathered from that video. It's about 40 minutes. I'll be sure to put the link in the chat so y'all can check it out. Highly recommend it, especially if you don't want to read the 200 plus pages of the actual rule. Yeah, look at that 40-minute video. You'll have a good grasp of some of the basic requirements. Some key things, as I mentioned, about the 3 levels. So there's no score for level 1. It's a self-assessment, but pretty much you either meet the requirements or you don't. There's no in between, but it's annual self-assessment. Level 2, each requirement has a weight of 1, 3, or 5 points, and the maximum you can score is 110. And in order to get a CMMC level 2 certification, you have to score perfect of 110 points. I will talk a little more about the remediation if you don't score 110 during your initial assessment, but we'll cover that momentarily. Level 3, that is going to be, the DoD hasn't really explicitly outlined what organizations will require a level 3 assessment, because that one imposes additional 24 requirements from the NIST 800-172. And for those companies that are in no special programs, you can imagine like the primes and maybe some contractors that are working on really sensitive projects that are not classified but pretty close. They'll likely require a level 3. But for those companies, those lucky, fortunate companies, they're going to first have to get their level 2 assessment done by a C3PO. Then the DoD DIPCAC assessors will perform the level 3 assessment. So they'll only assess those additional 24 requirements that are outlined in 800-172. All the results will be in the SPURS core, will be in the SPURS system, and that's what the contracting officers will need to review before awarding contracts. Once that CMMC DFARS 7021 clause is in solicitations and requiring whatever that CMMC level is, then the contracting officers will be able to look in SPURS and make sure that the defense contractors have that certification before awarding the contract. So POAMs essentially are your remediation plans. If there are any deficiencies discovered during your certification assessment for level 2, you have to score at least a minimum of 80% to even qualify for any POAM items to be on your assessment. And if you do, you meet that 80% threshold, then any deficiencies that were identified by the C3PO assessor, then you have 180 days to close out those deficiencies. In the meantime, you would have a provisional or conditional CMMC level 2 certification. But if you don't close out those deficiencies within 180 days following the end of your initial assessment, then that conditional certification will be revoked. And part of closing out whatever those items are, a C3PO will have to come back out and do the closeout assessment for your POAM. So whether that's virtual or if they need to come out and assess any physical controls. But you would have 180 days maximum following the end of your assessment. But the only thing that's going to be assessed are those deficiencies. Some other key takeaways from the overview that DoD offered is essentially there have been organizations, defense contractors and subcontractors who have gone through the Joint Surveillance Assessment, the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program, the JSVAP, and those are assessments performed by C3POs in conjunction with the DCMA DIPCAC, the DoD. And I believe it's about 50 companies at this point that has gone through those voluntary assessments, and they're assessed against the CMMC level 2 requirements. So for those companies, the DoD is promising that their DIPCAC high assessment, which what they have now, will be converted to a CMMC level 2 assessment once the CMMC proposed rule becomes a final rule, and it'll be good for 3 years from their original assessment date. So that's very disappointing for a lot of defense contractors who have gone through that program, because it's been active about 2 years now, I believe. So if you can imagine, you're one of those first companies going through that voluntary program, they won't have much time left on that conversion to a level 2 certification, because the date starts from when they originally had their assessment performed. And then also any of those companies, they have to have scored a perfect 110, no deficiencies, in order to qualify for that CMMC level 2 certification conversion. And some next things that Stacy Bajani closed out with, essentially saying that the difference between CMMC 1.0 and 2.0 is a reduced complexity, reduced down from 3 levels to 5, provided more flexibility for POAM requirements, and then also mitigates, allow some self-assessments for level 2, and requiring level 1 to only be a self-assessment. So essentially, this is how the DoD is justifying, like, hey, we have spent the last 2 years improving CMMC 2.0, trying to make it have a less of an impact on small businesses, but ultimately their concern is protecting national security. And with our adversaries still in that controlled unclassified information, they want to stop the the bleeding. They want to actually make sure that defense contractors are complying with their cybersecurity requirements. So these are just some of the takeaways hot off the presses from this morning when DoD released their video. And I believe I have the link ready. Yeah. So in the chat, I put the link to the video in the chat. Highly recommend you check it out. Not right now after this presentation, but they're certainly worth checking out to get a better understanding of DoD's position and the CMMC rule requirements. So now I'm going into a little more detail about CMMC. And so starting out with understanding is the federal contract information and type of information you're dealing with. So essentially any defense contractor or federal contractor is going to have FCI, because that's going to be any information that's not intended for public release. So whether that's the schedule of your contract, any details related to your contract, at a minimum, yeah, you're going to have FCI if you're a contractor or subcontractor, meaning that at a minimum, you're going to need to be in compliance with CMMC level 1, which maps directly to the FAR 21 clause, applying to all federal contractors. Now, if you graduate up to CMMC level 2 and you have controlled unclassified information, it's going to be any information that government-wide policies require safeguarding and dissemination controls. Now you have to comply with all 110 requirements found in 800-171. Then if you have export controlled information, that means you cannot release it to any foreign nationals, and just imposes more requirements and restriction on the handling of that sensitive information. Some examples of FCI and CUI: delivery date, schedules. When you're looking at CUI, I think kind of more a rule of thumb, kind of technical information, blueprints or health information, sensitive PII. A lot of different types of information can fall into CUI. And where a lot of defense contractors struggle with is oftentimes they're not informed by the DoD or their prime contractor what actually is CUI. It's not properly labeled, categorized. They just don't know. But ultimately, the DoD's position is it's whoever's handling that sensitive information, it's up to them to know what category it falls into and properly label it and protect it. So it puts the onus on the defense contractors, unfortunately. A little more details about the levels. So in the proposed rule, prior to the proposed rule, the DoD had pretty much, it was still 15 requirements. They had broke out one of the requirements into 2, but now they just directly make it 15 requirements that maps directly to the FAR 21 clause. I mentioned level 2, 110. You need that every 3 years. And then level 3, 110 plus. That's going to add additional 24 requirements. So 134 requirements for level 3. Now, there are some exceptions for CMMC level 2. If you're strictly dealing with COTS, commercial off-the-shelf products, then you can potentially qualify for an exception. Or if you're not generating, processing, and storing CUI, then you can qualify for an exception. But you definitely have to be able to justify that and request that exception, typically through your contracting officer, and the DoD CIO will need to approve. But no, that avenue is there, but I wouldn't bank on it. It's going to be very few companies that really fall into those categories to get a CMMC level 2 exception. Now looking at the actual technology that you're going to leverage to satisfy the requirements. I took this screenshot off the Microsoft website, and it's extremely important to understand. So if you are handling controlled unclassified information, the performance of your contract or subcontract, then that CUI is not authorized to be stored in Microsoft Commercial or any of the other commercial cloud offerings. And this directly, Microsoft is telling you that, hey, if you have CUI, then yeah, the commercial does not qualify. If you have that 7012 clause that I mentioned, you cannot use commercial, because essentially Microsoft 365 commercial does not comply with the incident reporting requirements that are found in clauses C through G in DFAR 7012. So if you're going to stick with Microsoft, you're going to need to either be in GCC High or GCC or GCC High. or the DoD. So those are your options. The commercial cloud offerings are not compliant for storing CUI. Other government cloud offerings, think about Azure Gov Cloud, Google Gov Cloud. Those are ones where are compliant for storing CUI, but not the commercial offerings. Really important to understand. So whenever I'm working with defense contractors, I hate to break that bad news every time when they're storing that CUI in Microsoft Commercial or any of those other commercial offerings. That is a violation of their contractual requirements. Big no-no, and that's going to be an automatic fail if you for your CMMC level 2 certification. That's a non-starter. Questions about those commercial offerings versus the government offerings? All right, so this is just a quick preview. If you look in 800-171, and I actually recommend that you look into 800-171 Alpha, which is an assessment guide, or the CMMC Level 2 assessment guide, you'll see that, so at the high level, that bold, that is the actual requirement itself. So that's one of the 110 requirements. But we're oftentimes, whenever defense contractors are trying to perform a self-assessment and they don't have that expertise, they don't understand the nuances, they'll perform a self-assessment and then they'll just essentially stop at, think of this as like the parent question, the requirement. But keeping in mind, doing an actual assessment, the assessors are going to be looking at these assessment objectives. So for each requirement, it has corresponding assessment objectives where that assessor is going to validate that you have properly implemented that practice. So if you're stopping at the parent level question without even addressing that you need evidence for all of these assessment objectives, then there's no way that you're going to complete that self-assessment properly. So you have to factor in assessment objectives and knowing that, yeah, it's a best practice to have at a minimum one artifact evidence per assessment objective, but a good best practice to have at least two, whether that's screenshots, policies, procedures, or whatever you're saying is satisfying that assessment objective. You have to do it. And it's not a subjective measure. It is objectively, that's how the assessors are going to score for you. So methods they're going to use, they're going to either examine, that means reviewing your policies, procedures. There are a lot of policy requirements where you have to have the documentation. You can't just say, hey, yes, we have that process in place, and the assessor is going to take your word for it. They're going to want to see documented policies, procedures. They're going to also interview. They have the option to interview those system administrators or anyone who's performing that requirement. Interview them to make sure that they're doing what they're say they're doing, or doing what's actually outlined in your policy and procedure. So they have to match up. Your policies and processes have to map up with actually what's being performed. And then they can perform tests. Now, the CMMC assessors, they're not going to touch any of your equipment. They shouldn't see any CUI or anything like that. A test is going to be actually just basically looking over your shoulder or having you screen share while you demonstrate a control. For an example, let's say you in your policy, it outlines that you require multi-factor authentication to log into your application that is storing CUI. So they're going to say, okay, let me see you log in. And they're going to want to see that you're prompted for that multi-factor authentication before they mark that assessment objective as met. So the DIPCAC, which are the DoD assessors, they've been performing these NIST 800-171 assessments selectively based on the sensitivity that the contractor is dealing with as far as information. And these are just some of the top 10 deficiencies or other than satisfactory requirements that they note during all of the assessments they perform. Number one on that list is the FIPS validated cryptography. That is a huge one. So if you're using any solution to encrypt CUI, let's say, for example, in a cloud environment, or you're transmitting encrypted CUI, whether it's at your firewall or whatever you're using, then that module, encryption module needs to be FIPS validated 140-2 or higher. So it's really confusing for defense contractors because let's say that cryptography solution, that vendor is marketing their their solution as FIPS compliant or FIPS certified. That's not the same as FIPS validated. In order to achieve FIPS validation, that vendor has to go through a really comprehensive testing process that NIST performs, and they have to go through that process. Really expensive, takes a long time, but yeah, the DIPCAC doing their assessments, they're finding that a lot of defense contractors they're using non-approved cryptography solutions to encrypt CUI. Other ones, multi-factor authentication, scanning for vulnerabilities. Let's get into some of the mapping real quick. Jim mentioned about the scans that they can perform, the weekly scans. That's something that's one of the mappings that can potentially help you satisfy this requirement. You can demonstrate that, hey, we're working with CISA. CISA is performing these vulnerability scans on our in-scope systems, and they are providing us with the reports and so forth. That potentially can help satisfy some of at least the assessment objectives for this practice. Also with the auditing and logging, test incident response capability. This is one directly that CISA potentially can help you satisfy that requirement. As Jim mentioned, either himself or someone from the Kansas City or DC team can come out and facilitate a tabletop exercise for you. If you're doing that at least annually, that's evidence that whatever the report you received from CISA, that you completed your tabletop exercise or incident response plan, then hey, that's money that you don't have to pay a consultant thousands of dollars to come in and perform that facilitation. And that's something Aspire Cyber does, do those incident response facilitations. And yeah, they're not cheap unless you go with CISA. There's no cost at that point. But that's something that every organization should be doing, testing their incident response plan. And for CMMC, you have to do it. It's not an option. And the last one I'll mention, as far as baseline configuration, making sure that for all your in-scope systems for your CMMC assessment, if you're using laptops, BYOD, mobile devices, whatever's in scope needs to have an established baseline, documented baseline, and you have documented policies and procedures saying how you're adhering to that baseline. Those are just some of the findings that the DIPCAC have been finding during their assessments. All right, now I'll wrap up with just some key takeaways. It really is important to start off with an asset inventory. It's really one of the basics, and clearly understand what technology, people, processes touch your DoD contract assets and information. So starting off with that, then you can get a good understanding, okay, what's going to be in scope for your assessment. That's one of the big things when you're preparing for a CMMC level 2 assessment, is you want to limit the scope. And I mentioned earlier about if you're allowing any of your employees, for example, to access CUI on their personal phones, highly recommend against doing that. But just keeping in mind, that's expanding the scope, and you want to limit that scope as much as possible, because as you limit the scope, that's less work, less money, less costs related to doing the assessment. Want to make sure you perform your gap assessment, and then submit your SPUR score, which is already a contractual requirement to submit that annually. And then it's going to be a significant undertaking, really with the documentations and mapping all of the evidence. But once you're ready, you'll contact a C3PO. Again, I mentioned Aspire Cyber is a candidate, so we hope to be authorized C3PO within the next 3 or 4 months once we get our assessment. But you also can go on the CyberAB marketplace. So cyberab.org, I believe, their marketplace shows the authorized C3POs and also assessors that you can work with. I'll close out my contact information, our website, aspirecyber.com. Feel free to email me, have any questions. Also, I put out a lot of free content on our Aspire Cyber YouTube channel related to CMMC. And I did a full podcast interview with Jim. He's gracious enough to grant some of his time and expertise to just kind of talk about more in depth their services. And I think now we can open it up for questions. Let me stop sharing.
Okay, do you guys see my screen? It says questions.
I don't see your screen yet. Does anyone else see it?
Jim, do you see my screen? It's Derich's last slide.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Oh, okay. That's why I was confused. I see it.
I kind of tricked you there.
Yeah, that tricked me.
So, thank you very much to both of you. I think that was really informative. It's obviously a lot of information. What I'd like to do is, ask questions or solicit questions from the group. This is your opportunity to, there's no question that's, there's no such thing as a dumb question. I really don't believe that. We want to be here to help you guys navigate through this. Obviously, we've highlighted some resources that are available. Derek talked about, if you're looking for that DoD certification, things to be aware of, which I think, I chuckled at. I was delighted to see that the DoD, and I'm like, well, I'm glad you were delighted. Someone's got to be delighted over this information, right? So obvious passion for what he does. But does anyone in the group have a question they'd like to pose to Derek or Jim? You can either pop it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and speak up, you could do that as well. Give it a minute, because I know people can be shy. This is your opportunity. We've got a question in the chat. Jeff says it was a very good session. It provides him with a greater understanding of cybersecurity to have discussions with clients on this subject. So Jeff is one of our, what we call our strategic advisors at CIRAS. And he is one of, I think, 5 or 6 individuals. They're regional across the state, and they work with manufacturers. And so, one of the things I realized several years ago is there's a lot of things that we can do to help companies, right? And and the challenge is figuring out how we help the company and meet the needs that they have versus what we think their needs are, right? And so the other problem associated with that is cybersecurity is a complex topic in and of itself, right? A lot of our people on the ground speak manufacturing, but they may not feel so secure in cybersecurity and what that looks like for a business. So they may not, I guess, I don't want to say market, but they may not market that content as, hey, this is a way that CIRAS can help you. And so that's, why we have events like this, not only for what people across the state are doing, but so that we can all be aware of the resources that we're tapping into, because man, we do a lot at CIRAS. I talked today about the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, but we also have a leg that does government contracting. So if you are working or looking into that government market, there are counselors, again, another federal program that can help you navigate what that looks like. So if you have the clause, hey, how do I find out if I have a DFARS clause 7012 in my contract? Your Apex team can help you with that. And we can, and their services are completely at no cost to you. It's a DoD funded program because the DoD realizes, oh, what we're doing is really complicated and complex, and we should probably offer some assistance to companies trying to break into this market. Because here's the thing, the DoD and actually any agency, large government agency, has requirements for small businesses to be part of the solution. There are goals, small business goals that contracts have within them. But oftentimes, those small businesses struggle breaking into that market because it is so convoluted and there are so many regulatory requirements that they have to adhere to. And if you understand a small business, which most of you are, you know, you don't have a designated person who's doing proposal development or who's, you know, responsible for making sure you're in compliance with your quality and your cyber and all the other things. And so, you know, again, highlighting that there are tools out there. One of the biggest takeaways for myself during the pandemic was how important it is. And so you guys all showed up here today to learn something about cybersecurity, but I can't tell you how important it is to continue that relationship. Okay, you've come to an event, reach out to somebody here at CIRAS, whether it's me or whether it's somebody, you know, like Jeff White, who's here learning alongside me. Reach out to one of us, talk with us, you know, explore how we can connect you not only to the resources we offer in-house, but to resources outside of this, you know, CIRAS, because that's what we do. I think we're really great connectors. And during that pandemic, what I saw happen was there was a lot of opportunities. There were some funding opportunities from different agencies for companies to get through that pandemic. And if you don't know about it, you don't know about it, right? And so it's really an opportunity to, you know, connect with people who connect and learn something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I could jump in here for a second to speak of the pandemic, I tend to be an optimist. I look for silver linings, and as terrible as the pandemic was, it showed a lot of companies that they could, in fact, have remote workers, right? And it enabled a lot of places. I know we scrambled in Europe. It was insane, let's put it that way, to try to continue to do our job in a pandemic environment. And so the good side was it showed a lot of companies that it was possible. The downside was that a lot of companies implemented remote work, but they didn't put any kind of really good security controls around how people dialed into their systems. Now, after the pandemic, one of the things that we've run into a lot is that companies are continuing to provide that remote worker solution, but they still haven't put in the security behind it. And we can help with that. We can say, hey, here's some options you can do to help make that better. Let's go back and look at how did you handle things in the pandemic and make sure that, you know, if you're continuing those remote work operations, here's some options that you may want to look at to make sure that that's secure, because remote worker access is one of the largest problems we run into in cybersecurity. So I just wanted to throw that out there that, hey, we can help. You just got to ask.
Yeah, it's a great point. That absolutely, that's a vulnerability, right? That we tried to we tried to be quick and find ways to work through that disruption, but maybe there were some holes in, you know, the execution that we now have the luxury of time to try to repair. So I'm not seeing any questions come through. I do want to let you know that on March 7th, Derek and I will be hosting another webinar, and it's going to be specific to that NIST SP 800-171 standard that we talked about. Derek is going to do a presentation on some lessons learned. And so this is for companies who are, you know, obviously focused on that DoD requirement. And he's going to talk us through, hey, these are some of the things that we're seeing coming through. And I don't know about you, I learn a lot listening to the storytelling, right? There's a lot we can learn by paying attention, listening to others' experiences, and hopefully learning what not to do to prepare ourselves. And I have one more comment I want to make, and then I'll you know, see if Derek and Jim have any closing comments. You know, one of the things I noted in Derek's slides was he said, for level 1, no score is required. So I'm assuming that's the assessment score that you would upload into SPRS, which is a government system. And, it may be that there's no score required, no upload required. But here's where I'm going to tell you, you might want to think about that a little harder. If you have a real case scenario, we have a client who has a customer, and it's a big DoD defense company. That client has been mandated to reach level 2 cybersecurity by the CMMC level 2 by a certain date. And the thing about that is, there's discussion. Well, I don't know what information we hold. Is it really necessary? Do we have commercial off-the-shelf items? If your customer is dictating what the requirement is, I think you have to pay attention to your customer, because what's going to happen is another real case scenario. One of my clients had a supplier worksheet they had to fill out, and I think it was Raytheon. And one of the questions that Raytheon asked in its supplier interview was, are you compliant with the DoD NIST, the standard, and the client asked me, well, it's something we're working on, but can we just check yes? No, you may not just check yes, because that's a lie. And it's a breach of contract, honestly, right? So when we're talking about what's in your contract, it's really important what those requirements are. And if it's a case of, well, we don't think we have any CUI, if the government has dictated, you can try to make that case back to the government, whether or not you have CUI in your organization or not. I don't think you're going to win, because what I think what we're going to see is it becomes a management issue, right? How do we ensure that the vendors that we have, hosting our data, like the Raytheon example, if my suppliers are risky for me, or if I have one or two over here who aren't compliant because they don't want to, that's a risk for me as a large business. That's a risk for me as a business. That's a risk for me as a human, right? Because guess what? Guess who the weakest links are, guys? It's you, all of us, right? We are the weakest link with our, logging into personal things, and, and so, education can go a long way, but the reality is you need to be paying attention to what those customer standards are, because what I feel like is going to happen is they're going to eliminate you from that supply chain because you're risk to them. And when we think about a large company like Lockheed or Boeing or Raytheon, they don't have time to manage one company who isn't in compliance. They want to make their life as easy as possible, right? And so they're going to try to, tighten up wherever they can. And for those that aren't in compliance, they're probably going to, unless you offer something very unique and that is only offered by your company, that's a different story, right? Then maybe you have some negotiation that you can use. But the reality is they are taking this requirement from the DoD. I don't see the DoD coming down and saying, you're not doing your job. I see the DoD coming to the large primes and saying, is your supply chain secure? Have you verified that your supply chain is secure? That's what's going to happen. And that's what we're already seeing happen. So take a look at who is in your supply chain. And this goes for you too, right? You have suppliers for your business. Are your suppliers secure? It's all really important. And, the better we do, the less opportunity those bad guys have of, hijacking those vulnerabilities and getting into our systems. And one more thing, a couple of years ago, we did a an in-person event where we had the FBI cyber crimes. We had different a couple different cyber companies in Iowa who presented on, risk and it was interesting to me because, cybercrime is interesting. Not everything gets reported, right? So it's important when you see these statistics to understand that's only what's been reported. It's happening. And there was somebody in the room who said, well, if we come to the FBI because we're the victim of ransomware, are you going to tell anybody? And they were very concerned about what it would look like to say that they were the object of, a ransomware attack. And which, kind of made me I understand that, but at the same time, I'm like, isn't there an ethical, there's something ethical there. If you've got my information in your system, shouldn't I know that it's been exposed, right? But the other part of that was I asked the room, and there was probably 30 people in the room representing different companies. I said, show of hands, how many of you in here have been victim of ransomware? Half of the room raised their hands. And so it's happening. We're talking about it more. This was like 3 years ago, but I don't think we're talking about it enough because I think we think because we're small, fish in the lake, it's not happening to us when in fact it's probably happening, as Jim showed you in his critical infrastructure. I think it was critical manufacturing was like number 2 on the list as far as the most targeted. So, not trying to scare you, but trying to propel you into taking some action, whatever that is. Jim, you have the information to reach out. Jim and his team can kind of guide you through some of those basic steps. And if you're looking for specific requirements, we can help you get you looked up with Derich to, what does it look like to get you over the, the finish line so that you're in compliance with a particular standard, for that customer.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump on that a little bit if I can, Melissa. When you talk about contacting the FBI or contacting CISA, contacting me if you have an incident, we use what's called the traffic light protocol. And it's available on our website, very clear. And the bottom line is you tell us how protected you want that information to be. If you want that information to not be shared with absolutely anybody else, even say my boss would not, my supervisor in Kansas City may not have a need to know. Okay, I can protect it down to that level that only the very few people who need to know something will ever see that information. Okay, and when the FBI gets the information, I always think it's a great idea to contact the FBI. That's the company line, right? The government line. Tell us. We can't help you if you don't tell us. I will say though that if you are hit with ransomware and you are asked to pay in cryptocurrency, remember this is a business. If they say pay in cryptocurrency and you don't know how to do that, they have service desks. You can call them up and say, hey, how do I do this? And they'll tell you, or send them an email and they'll tell you how to do cryptocurrency. But the point is, if you involve the FBI early, they can go ahead. They have a 70% recovery rate on cryptocurrency ransomware payments. Their RAT team, their I forget what the acronym is, but it's asset recovery team. Okay, but they switch around and make it sound cool. RAT. They're running 70%. They can recover that cryptocurrency. The other reason that I feel you should call the FBI is that a lot of people who do ransomware are not generally your neighbors. Okay, they're operating from inside of a country that we do not have extradition agreements with. Okay, so a lot of them operate out of North Korea, and the North Korean government lets them operate out of there for a cut of the money. Right? North Korea is cash starved. They want money. So if you happen to get hit by a ransomware organization that is operating out of North Korea and you pay that money ends up in North Korea and you have just committed a felony. Okay. It is not illegal to not tell anybody if you've been hit with ransomware. It's not illegal to say, hey, I didn't tell the FBI. That's fine. That is your decision. But I'm letting you know, if that cryptocurrency ends up in North Korea and the FBI finds out about that, they will call you. Okay. You don't have to call them, they'll call you. And it'll be a different conversation. The earlier you get the FBI involved, the earlier they can help. And if you do call the FBI, they're not going to swoop in a black van and a bunch of guys get out and they run into your organization. Everybody away from the computers. That's not how it works. Okay. They come in and they want to help. All right. They can't touch your computers either. Okay. So just remember that, we're not the heavy-handed organization that a lot of people, they say, oh my God, the feds. Guys, we're here to help. Okay. We understand. Been there, done that. Like I said, I've been an IT manager for 20 some years. I understand your issues. Okay. Let us help you and let the FBI help too. I just wanted to throw that in there, kind of a plug
Yeah.
from my sister agency.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Jared, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, certainly. And I notice whenever working with defense contractors or small businesses, that's one of the biggest things they complain about, just the cost for cybersecurity. And I think a challenge for them is really being able to understand what free resources are available. So I think it's really great doing these type of webinars and informational sessions to let you know what's available out there. Because if you don't know, then you'll likely pay a consultant like myself when you don't necessarily have to in certain situations. So there are a lot of free resources available to you. And I'm a big fan of sharing those free resources because, yeah, small businesses don't have a lot of just extra money lying around to spend on cybersecurity. So if you can leverage those free resources to help ensure that you're not that low hanging fruit, that you're not a soft target, then it's a win-win for everybody. And also, I wanted to piggyback on what Melissa said regarding with the prime contractors. I'm seeing that where, yeah, they are pushing to ensure that their supply chain is compliant with 800-171/CMMC. So even prior to the CMMC rule becoming final, they know the writing's on the wall. And like when Melissa stated, it's a um, risk pretty much proposition for them. They're not going to take on the risk of a small business that refuses to comply with the requirements, because that puts them on the hook. So they're certainly going to deal with businesses that are adhering to the contractual requirements. And a lot of the small businesses I'm working with, they view compliance as a more so a competitive advantage, helps differentiate them between other small businesses who are being lackadaisical about it or procrastinating. Yeah, they're going to have a competitive advantage over those businesses. And now with DoD, once they start requiring the CMMC certification to be on file, that's going to be a clear competitive advantage. Because if you as a small business want to bid on those solicitations and you haven't even started your compliance journey, then you're easily a year behind those other small businesses who have already are either already in line to get their certification or have already completed their certification. So a big competitive advantage. And it's not just the federal sector. In terms of contracting, I see it a lot on the commercial side, private sector, where it's a big competitive advantage, where essentially is a cost of doing business, being able to demonstrate that as a company, you're able to protect your customer sensitive information because the secret's out. If a large company or medium-sized company has a supply chain that they're sharing sensitive information with, and that supply chain, those vendors are not secure, then that's the low hanging fruit. That's going to be the soft target that those cyber criminals are going to target. It makes it a lot easier. So if you think about it, it's a lot easier for a cyber criminal or adversaries to target small defense contractors to get sensitive CUI and other information than to directly try to target the DoD. They know Department of Defense spends billions of dollars a year on cybersecurity. But if the DoD is sharing that sensitive information that they're securing internally, and once they share it with a contractor or sub and so forth, that's going to be the easy targets for our adversaries. So it's just just really accept it as a cost of doing business, but know that there's a lot of free resources out there available for you. And it's just really a challenge being able to compile them all and understand what is what's going to be the best fit for you. And again, it's something that Melissa and I are going to work on, helping with that mapping in the context of CMMC to show you exactly which free resources map to for those CMMC requirements. Other than that, definitely appreciate your time today, and hopefully you all got some good value from this webinar. And I just can't emphasize enough. Jim says contact him. He wants to help. How many often do you hear people say, "Hey, I want to give you some of value free"? Okay, I just can't emphasize that enough, because those services are very expensive in the marketplace. I can tell you that they're not cheap. So if you can get them from a government agency, you already paid your tax dollars, certainly take advantage of that.
Yeah,
I
and
really
I
appreciate your. Oh,
go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
I really appreciate Darius allowing me to come out here and stand on my little soapbox and stuff. And he's been a great partner with me on getting the word out as to what we have to offer. And like Derek, I'm in a position where if I find other resources that can help you that are free, I'm gonna advertise them. I have no pride of ownership in any of this stuff. I'm just the messenger. I'm the guy who can come out and sit down and say, here's what we got. If your particular organization has other requirements besides something I can fill, but like Health and Human Services, for example, has an absolutely fantastic cybersecurity program for companies that are in the medical device manufacturing or in the medical field itself. I will push those out too and say, hey, I take advantage of this stuff. Okay. I don't have any pride. Like I said, I have no pride of ownership. I don't care where you get the information. I don't care where you get the guidance. I don't care what standards you go by. As long as you're doing something, okay, to make things better for everybody, that's what I care about. And if I can help, that's awesome. If Darish or other companies can help, that's awesome. Melissa, you're helping, that's awesome. CIRAS is helping. Other organizations inside ISU are helping. Other organizations, national, state, and local, are all helping. It's all here. Just ask. That's all you got to do. You got to ask me. I'm like a vampire. Okay. I can't come in unless I'm invited, right? But if I do come in, I'm going to give you everything I got. And I appreciate it. And I really don't have anything else to add either, other than thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks to everybody who showed up today. Thanks to Derek and Jim. And if you guys wouldn't mind, there should be a survey in your inbox. It probably was triggered when you logged into the webinar today. Please fill that out. Let us know what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, what you'd like to see more of. If there's topics that you guys want us to delve more into, please let us know that. That's, why we're here. And we try our best to put ourselves in your seats and what would be beneficial. But nobody is a better use for that than yourselves, right? So please share with us what those challenges are, and we can figure out how can we help you navigate through those challenges, whether it's a training or whether it's maybe some one-on-one time with somebody. We are all here to help. So I think with that, we are going to close up for the rest of the day. And thanks, everybody. I hope the sun's shining where you're at. I see it's finally making its appearance here in Iowa, in Eastern Iowa. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
If you receive value from this episode, I invite you to subscribe and like so that you're the first to know when we release new episodes. Also, check out cmmcproof.com to learn more about the arsenal of resources that we provide to equip you to conquer CMMC. We'll see you next time.